Welcome students. Today we will discuss about second unit of first aid. In second unit, first topic is cuts and wounds. Before starting the topic, I request you that please stop corona, and as our Prime Minister have requested each citizen that we should stay at home. So please, you should stay at home and ask your family members that we can save ourselves from this deadly disease only by staying at home. While staying at home, you can improve your knowledge for your basic subjects. I will help you. You can drop me your queries in comment section, and I will accordingly prepare the different types of videos, and I will try to give notes also on Blogspot. I received inquiry about this second unit of A&M syllabus, so I am preparing this video. What is cuts and wound? In your examination, basically you may get two types of questions here. Number one, what is wound? Define wound and classify them. And another question, what is hemorrhage or bleeding? Because in wound, during cuts and wounds, you will see bleeding and hemorrhage also. So second question appears about hemorrhage. What is hemorrhage? What are the types of hemorrhage? And then what first aid you will apply. Dear students, please keep in mind, while answering the questions on first aid, you should write only first aid, that we can help out the victim on site where that problem happened, not the care, actual care which is given at hospital. That is treatment. We will not discuss the treatment part. We will discuss only first aid which we give. So when we are seeking answer of first question, what is wound and what are the types of wound? So you need to make notes of this chapter, because it is clearly and very easily given in your books. So I will not put in the blog. Just you listen this lecture and read your book. You will definitely learn, and you can write in your answer. So wound is the breakage in continuity of the skin. Okay, and due to this, there are chances of entry of microbial organisms which may spread infection. Simple two-line definition. And what is important here, that the types of wounds. Okay, so there are four types of wounds. What are those? Number one, incised wound. Okay, incised wound, as name suggests, there the edges have clear cut. Okay, like it may be made by a razor, knife, or sometimes the surgical incision which is given in operation. They are known as incised wound. Their edges are very clear, but bleeding may be more because there may be clear cut in the blood vessels. Second is lacerated wound. Lacerated wound is slightly different from incised wound. Lacerated wound have no clear edges. There are the wound which is made by dog bite. So they have no clear edge. So this is known as lacerated wound. Then third type is contused wound. Contused wound is made by normally blow of a blunt object, and sometimes when you are running and fall on road, So at that time you may get bruises, and this type of wound is known as contused wound. And fourth wound is punctured wound. Punctured wound is made by sharp objects which pierces into the skin. It may be made by gunshot wound, needle, etc. So these wounds, puncture wound, are very we can say they bleed less, but they may become very infected. Okay. Now we come to the hemorrhage. What is hemorrhage? Hemorrhage is escape of blood from the blood vessels, and we classify the hemorrhage by two different methods. First method is according to the surface, according to the body surface, we can say. So as per body surface, we have two types of hemorrhage: external hemorrhage or external bleeding, and internal bleeding. Okay, as name suggests, external bleeding means the blood can be seen outside the body. Okay, and normally when there is open wound, all types of wound we have just discussed, they have external bleeding. Okay, and internal bleeding, when skin is intact and blood is oozing or coming out in the internal body cavities, in subcutaneous tissues, as well as in the hollow bodies such as chest cavity or GIT. These are known as internal bleeding. Second classification of hemorrhage. Second classification of hemorrhage shows according to the blood vessel involved. Okay, two types of classification are there. Number one, according to surface, that we have discussed two types: external bleeding and internal bleeding. And according to the blood vessel involved, we have different types of hemorrhages depending upon the type of vessel. So how many types of vessels are involved in bleeding? Number one, arterial bleeding. When blood come out of artery, then it is known as arterial bleeding, and this type of bleeding is very we can say like a jet, because it is directly the blood is coming through force, because heart is pumping, and directly it is coming through artery, and it is bright red of color, and we have to control it as early as possible. In first aid we have to manage so that patient may not go into shock. Second type is venous bleeding. Venous bleeding or venous hemorrhage, when the blood is coming out of veins, and in this type blood is not coming through force, it is coming continuously, and the color is not dark, it is a bit it is not dark red, it is chocolate red. As you know that the color of arterial blood and venous blood is different, you can clearly identify. And then third type of bleeding according to this classification is capillary bleeding. Okay, so in capillary bleeding, when we have small cuts in any capillary, we have drop like oozing of blood. So this type is capillary bleeding, and capillary bleeding is very easy to stop. Just put this pressure with fingers and we can stop the capillary bleeding in first aid. Then what we can do in venous bleeding or arterial bleeding? For venous bleeding and arterial bleeding, we have to put pressure, which may be direct pressure or indirect pressure. Okay, so in first aid of bleeding or in first aid of wound, you can apply some principles. What first aid you will give to the patient of bleeding or wound? Commonly you can write, just put heading that first aid for the client of wound and hemorrhage. Number one, reassure the client. Okay, we should reassure the client that yes, we know how to stop this bleeding, you need not to worry. Lie down the client, or if it is not possible, then make him sit. You should keep in mind that bleeding is less when the client is sitting than in standing position, and even less when he is lying down than sitting position. So make him comfortable, assure, and raise the part that is bleeding. But keep in your mind that there should not be any fracture. If fracture is there, then we cannot move or we cannot raise. Then we have to immobilize the part. After that, we should loosen the clothes which is around the wound. But keep in mind that we should loosen minimum or minimum clothes. We should bear the wound and see the wound. Now, if the wound is having some pierced object and can easily removed, you can see, and just it is on the surface you can remove, but it is in the deep, then we should not try to remove it in first aid. It can be removed in the hospital during treatment, but just keep it there if it is deep pierced. Otherwise, you can move and just cover the wound. If bleeding is heavy, then you have to put a bit pressure, direct pressure on the wound, and otherwise you can just cover the wound and transport the casualty to the medical facility. This is all about first aid of wound and bleeding. And in bleeding, one more thing you can write, that if direct pressure is not sufficient, we have applied pressure and we have applied bandage and we are transporting the client to casualty, but still bleeding is there and it is arterial bleeding. If it is venous bleeding, then it can be stopped by direct pressure. If it is venous bleeding, then we have to apply indirect pressure. So how you will apply indirect pressure? Indirect pressure can be applied by pressure points. We have certain pressure points. For example, carotid pressure point here, brachial pressure point in the hand, femoral pressure point in the femoral part, and it is given in your book. You just make the notes that we will apply pressure in pressure points for indirect pressure. Okay, in this way you can clear your question of wound, classification of wound, hemorrhage, classification of hemorrhage, and first aid in hemorrhage. Okay, dear friend, take care of yourself, your family. Stay home, stay safe. Thank you.